Changes spanning generations, or a shift in the wind, a body dormant underground. This world is right.
Welcome to Onward Live, a live stream focused on encouraging you to create a life you love living now. Let's go beyond success to significance. Being clear on our why is crucial. It requires doing the inner work, finding ourselves, getting to know ourselves, embracing our inner child, shedding social conditioning, and letting go of perfect. We know obstacles make us stronger. We can dream big and take action. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. I invite you to tune in every week and engage with me and my inspiring guests. Invite your friends. Let's make time for what matters most in our lives. Let's move onward together. Hello, everybody. I can see we've got some people watching, so I'm excited to see you here. My name is Emily Harmon. I'm the host of the Onward Live show, and then I republish it later as the Onward podcast. So I'm excited to have you all here. I know I have a very special guest tonight. So I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I retired about 3 years ago in May of 2019 after working for the Navy for 34 years, my whole life. And when I retired, I decided, I want to be a podcast host and I want to be a coach. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm a certified life coach, and I love coaching people on how they can create a life they love living. And that's different for everybody. And I have the now at the end. Create a life you love living now, because not once this changes or that changes, or when the kids grow up, or when this happens or when that happens. What can you do today? What little things can you do today that would help you love your life now? For example, yesterday I posted that instead of going to the gym to do yoga, I went outside and did it in the front lawn, and it was just a beautiful day. And that's a little out of my routine. Normally we just go through our routine. We operate, unconsciously, oh, I'm supposed to go to the gym. The class is tonight. Let me go there. No, well, how often do we stop and think, well, what's another way I could get my exercise in and still enjoy the day? And I just did yoga out in the front yard, hanging out with my dogs. So when I say create a life you love living now, I mean, how do you raise your energy level? How do you raise your vibration level so that you feel joy more often than you feel stressed and anxious? And those are some things I'm going to cover in future Onward Live episodes. But tonight, I want to welcome everybody here. And it'd be great if you put in the comments, let us know where you're tuning in from. Share that in the comments. And I'm going to bring Joshua in right now. And once I do that, we'll take a look at the comments and see what's going on there. So let me bring Joshua in. So Josh, welcome to Onward Live.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. We've been trying to schedule something like this for, I think, a year or so. And I think the timing right now is really good because for having you on the show, because some time has passed. You have a little bit more perspective than the time that we were talking about interviewing you before. I've interviewed your mom on this show, and that was an awesome episode. And I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes. She's very brave to share everything that she's been through, and you are too, because you guys have been through a lot. And talking about it, I don't know if that helps you or is hard for you, but by doing it, you're definitely helping other people. So many people this year the past 2 years with COVID, have been through a lot of trauma. And you titled this episode, Surviving Trauma and Thriving Forward. And in what you wrote to me, you said that you want to share your story and your belief that even through loss after loss after loss, there's still a chance for you to live your life in a healthy, constructive, and hopeful way. And I think you'd say there's still a chance for you to love your life.
Absolutely.
So welcome. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, it's definitely something that, a lot of people have asked about, a lot of people have expressed about. I mean, everybody at some point in their life experiences some sort of trauma. Um, and it's really, it's not something that you can really avoid as an individual. It just kind of happens. Sometimes we don't know why it happens, but it does. But it's bound to happen to all of us. And so, for me in my story, it's, my goal here today is to hope that, whoever's listening, and if somebody else is struggling with certain things in their life, that I can sort of give them some sort of inspiration, um, based off of what I've gone through. So.
Yeah. So let's, I wrote that in the past few years, you've survived the unthinkable, really. I mean, it's like you've lost both of your brothers and then your father. And Brendan, I think, passed away in 2011, and then Alex in 2020.
Yes.
And I know your mom is um, talked about it a little bit on the show, but that's from a mom's perspective. I'd like to hear it from your perspective. And then you've also recently graduated from Atlanta's John Marshall Law School, and you're going to be sitting for the bar exam soon. So you were able to keep on with your studies and stuff. So, like, tell us the background, tell us what happened, and then talk to us about how you dealt with it.
Sure. So I think really, if we're gonna start from the trauma. I think that it basically, all of this started, when I was young. My parents were divorced. Like so many other parents out there. I think the number is close to like 70% in the United States. So it's not something that's uncommon. Um, but I think that with Brendan, my older brother, I think that the trauma really started when parents got divorced, and he sort of just kind of, um, compartmentalized a lot of stuff that he didn't want to deal with. And I think that led to him, eventually abusing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the first step, in my journey that involved trauma really had to do with the divorce of my parents. And then, there was an incident, that happened with Brendan. And Brendan, was somebody that liked to do like extreme sports, like dirt bikes and water skiing, and all that kind of stuff. Like he was never into like team sports; it was always like individual stuff. Whereas I was always into team sports. I love to play on a team. I like to be football, basketball, tennis, all that kind of stuff. Um, but with Brendan, I think the first incident that I had with trauma was, he had come home from the lake with his friend. I think this was like when I was 11 or 12 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And he had taken pills from one of his friend's dad's medicine cabinets, just being over there. And so he came home, and, I was, like I said, 11, 12 years old. And he just kind of said, I think I'm going to go to sleep. I'm really tired. I had a long day at the lake, because they were at Lake Lanier. And he came home and he went to sleep. And um, out of nowhere, I just kind of popped into the hallway and heard some strange noises coming from his bedroom. And it turns out that he had overdosed on back pain pills, that he had taken from his friend's father's medicine cabinet that we had no idea about. But the incident that happened with that, I was an 11-year-old kid, but there was something in me that pulled me towards that incident because
How old was he?
Brendan, he's 3 years older than me, so he must have
Okay.
been 14, 14
14.
at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember telling my mom, something's not right here. Like you need to call the ambulance. It's an 11-year-old kid. I mean, I don't know how I've always been kind of just intuitive about certain things, but
Mm-hmm.
my mom just kind of brushed it off, like, let him sleep. He's tired, that kind of thing. And, I was like, no, like this is serious. So I grabbed the phone and I dialed 911 as a
Wow.
11-year-old kid. And then that's when my mom had heard me talking to the operator. That's when she's like, oh crap, like something's really going on here. And then, that was my first experience with something very, very traumatic happening to me. He survived. He ended up getting some treatment, and went a couple of years without abusing drugs. But it happened again when I was in 11th grade. Came home from school and found him underneath the kitchen table, overdosed again. Having to call 911, the whole shebang again, and having to deal with that, and having to deal with he was on probation for something that he had done with marijuana. And I remember he was so upset with me because he said, I'm going to violate my probation. I'm going to violate and he didn't understand that there was HIPAA and there's certain, things that, there's circumstances that protect you from that legally. But, he struggled with addiction his whole life, pretty much, from the time that we were early adolescents going into teenagers. And I just kind of watched that as a kid. And, it really shaped me because I was always telling myself, this is not who I want to be. I don't want to touch this stuff. I don't want to smoke a joint. I don't want to grab marijuana. I don't want to lean in for alcohol. I don't want to do any of that kind of stuff because this is what happens when you do those kinds of things. And that was my perspective. And the other part of that is also with my younger brother, Alex, because I'm the middle. Alex, I was kind of upset with Brendan for not really setting a good example for him.
Yeah.
And I had to take that responsibility on as well.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is. It was. And it's, it's not something that I asked for. It's not something that, I wanted to necessarily do, but I wanted to protect my family and I wanted everybody to be happy. I wanted my older brother to get clean. I wanted him to, do the things that he wanted to do. But it just kind of overtook my older brother. And,
How old were you all when your parents divorced?
2002, I was 11 years old. Yeah.
Yeah. That's difficult. And it's interesting. I mean, not that you can stereotype, but I've interviewed a lot of parents on their children who've had issues with drugs and alcohol, and then my son, and I've been around a lot of parents who've gone through this, and there's a lot of similarities in the children that don't want to play team sports. They'd rather skateboard and play, like do individual things. I see that. And they're all like super smart. I don't know if you can say that about your brother too, but smart in some ways. I used to say, well, if you would take all your smartness and apply it towards, school instead of learning, all the other stuff that he did that, I didn't know anything about. And I can see too, it's hard on a mom. I can be in your mom's shoes and think, oh, he's just tired, because sometimes you don't want to see it or you just don't see it.
Right. No, and you don't, and I think for her, she was so overwhelmed at the time with, being recently divorced and having to be a single mom now, getting used to that. I mean, it's always, she's a very strong woman, my mom, obviously I'm biased, I'm her son, but very strong woman to go through what she went through. But no, with Brendan, once again, I'm biased because these are my brothers, but they were brilliant. As far as intellectually, like they were absolutely brilliant. Now, did they make the right decisions? No, they didn't make the right decisions. But if you gave them a math test, were they going to pass it with a 97? Yeah, they were. I mean, my younger brother, for example, Alex, he spoke 3 languages.
Wow.
So, I mean, my dad spoke French. My dad spoke Arabic. He spoke Hebrew. He spoke English. He spoke a little Spanish. And my brother Alex would just learn the French language from my dad. And he knew Spanish because all of our friends were Hispanic. So we learned Spanish at an early age. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but Alex did.
Yeah,
I took it on.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So Brendan passed away. I wrote in 2011.
Brendan passed away in 2011 from a heroin overdose. He had been clean for about a year. He had an incident that happened with, I think it was his girlfriend at the time. I think they might have gotten into a fight. They broke up. And he basically tried to use the same amount of heroin that he used prior to getting clean. And he overdosed.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah. So we had to deal with that as a family in 2011. And, that was really, really hard for me personally, because like I was at that age where I was starting college. And it kind of just dragged me down because I was like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? What am I doing with my life? My older brother's dead. My parents are divorced. I could start to see that my younger brother was, he was on the right path. He was doing the right things. So, I mean, that burden wasn't on me. But it definitely took a toll. Definitely took a toll on us as a family when he passed away. And it honestly today, as I sit here and think about it, it feels so long ago that happened. Because I mean, 11 years, but I mean, it feels longer than that to me.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
Maybe you feel like you lost him before he passed away.
I think that that's a fair statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fair statement. But it was very difficult for my younger brother to process that grief than it was for me, because I was old enough to see what was going on at such a young age myself, that his behaviors and things that he was doing, getting locked up, messing up in school, using drugs, bringing people over to have house parties, things like that. Those were things that I was able to see. And so when to be honest with you, when all of this happened with Brendan, it was a shock to me because he was clean for a year.
Yeah.
But I think it's almost like in the back of my head, I knew, like, this is a possibility one day, because I already almost lost him twice. You got to remember, I
You're right.
stumbled upon him overdosed twice already. So this wasn't something that was completely, like, out of the norm for me. But for Alex, it was different. I think Alex took it a lot harder because I don't think Alex understood what really was going on with Brendan. I don't even
Alex is how many years younger than Brendan?
5, because
5
he's 2 years
years.
younger
So
than me.
you're in the middle.
Yeah,
And did you ever talk about it with Alex?
I did. We did. We talked about it a lot. There were times where we, sat down till 3 o'clock in the morning, just having conversations about, how did this happen? If he was still alive, what would we be doing? Things like
Mm-hmm.
that, brother stuff. But no, it definitely took a toll on Alex, and um, yeah.
So what did you and then Alex was still at home and you were off in college. Did you go away to college?
No, so the way that it worked was, for me, when my parents got divorced, we all lived with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that wasn't necessarily my choice,
Mm-hmm.
because at that time I was 11. They defer to the,
Mm-hmm.
if you're 13 or older, you can choose who you want to go live with,
Right.
and the courts will consider that. But for me, I didn't want to live with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
I can't sit here and, like, say why that
Mm-hmm.
was. I just felt like I was really, really close with my father,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like every young boy, needs to have a relationship with his father in order to learn how to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I necessarily understood that at the age of 11, but I wanted to be with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so, um, fast forward, after Brendan passes away in 2011, my dad gets a divorce from his second wife, the woman that he married after my mom, and he wanted me to come live with them. And he said, let's make an arrangement. I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing at that time. I was messing up. I wasn't in school full time. I was going from job to job. I had no direction.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I moved in with my father, that was completely different. It
Mm-hmm.
was like, bam, like, you're here, you got a choice. You're either going to go to school or you're going to work full time. If
Mm-hmm.
you work full time, you're going to have to pay rent. If you go to school, you don't have to pay rent. You make the decision. And so it was easy for me as, like, 18, 19-year-old kid. I'm like, oh, I don't have to pay rent. Like, let me just go to school and figure the school thing out. And so I went to GGC, and I stayed home. I lived with my dad the whole time that I was at GGC, save money. My goal is that I always knew I wanted to go to law school as soon as I started GGC. And so I wanted to save money, and, I wanted to rebuild lost time that I had with my dad. And at
Yeah.
that time, my younger brother ended up coming about 2 years after I moved in with my dad. He came to live with my dad as well. It was a
So
big house, in the suburbs here in Atlanta.
mm-hmm.
So I mean, it was plenty of room. Me and my brother Alex, we both lived with my dad, and he kind of took us under his wing, kind of made up for lost time from when we were little.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So then and it was Alex passed away in 2020. How did that happen?
um, certain things, certain details about that, I don't want to,
Yeah, it's fine.
because of, there's still a pending case
Mm-hmm.
in the court system right now.
Mm-hmm.
But he I can give you some facts. So essentially, I had no idea that Alex was struggling with addiction. We lived under the same roof. We talked every day. We saw each other every day. There wasn't one night. I wasn't the type of person to like go and like have spend sleepovers or stay at other people's houses. I mean, and Alex wasn't that way either. We would both kind of just like, if we had to go out with friends, whatever, we'd come home and then that was that.
Mm-hmm.
But with Alex, he towards the last year of his life, I started noticing some changes as far as his behavior, just kind of locking himself in his room, um, seemingly becoming more kind of like depressed in a way. Um, but he took what he thought to be a Percocet pill that he had gotten from somebody, and the individual that sold it to him knew that it wasn't a Percocet, and it actually contained fentanyl, and it killed him instantly.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's a completely different, that to be honest with you, that trauma of that circumstance still somewhat haunts me a little bit.
I bet, because I mean, it's like it was just so unexpected. Like you had said with Brendan, you had it in the back of your mind. You had found him twice.
Yeah, no, this was completely different than Brendan. I mean, this kid had his whole life in front of him. Alex had his whole life in front of him. I mean, he had so many friends, so many. I mean, like people to this day still like message me that I didn't even know were his friends. Like, man, I loved your brother. Your brother, like, I miss him. Blah blah blah. Just people loved Alex. Like, he was just one of those kids that like he had the charm. Like you know, that was Alex, and he had so many friends. I had no idea what he was struggling with, and like I said, I saw him every single day.
So
We
how did
talked every single day.
how did you handle that? How did you handle that? Like, I'm sure you second guessed yourself. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I'm assuming maybe
As far
because
as
that's what I would have done.
in terms of what you mean of
Like,
like,
why didn't I see it? Or how could I have, like, what did I miss? But
there were certain things that I look back on, little conversations that we had,
yeah.
that when I look back now, I'm like, this makes sense. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like, in a way, because it's like you kind of see, you don't see it in the moment because we're all
Right.
so preoccupied
Right.
with our lives. Like I remember my first year of law school. This was right before Alex passed. Alex passed in February of 2020. I started August of 19 in law school, so it was my first year going into my second semester, and you know I look back at some of the stuff that like he would come and we would talk, and I would be so busy with stuff
Yeah.
that I had going on in my life. And I'm like, man, I wish I would have made an extra 5 minutes to just stand there and talk to him for an extra 5 minutes. You constantly have that battle with yourself. I think that's part of the
Yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
is what did I miss? What could I have done differently? What could I have, um, I beat myself up about that for a long time. So,
How did you learn to stop beating yourself up?
um, there's an individual that I've worked for the past couple of years. He's an attorney. He's a criminal defense attorney here in Gwinnett. His name's Lawrence Lewis. Um, he really, I was working with him at the time that I lost my younger brother, and he really stepped in the shoes of a mentor, and then after my dad passed, into like a secondary father figure to me.
Yeah.
And he really explained some things that I couldn't even comprehend at the time, as far as like things that I could be doing to try and better my life at this moment. How can I process this grief without just kind of shrugging it under the rug? How can I process this grief in a constructive way versus doing abusive things like going out and drinking, or
Hmm.
breaking the law, or driving drunk, things like that, because those are all things that happen to people I think that's why people end up arrested and in the system, is because of unresolved grief, unresolved emotional damage.
Yeah, I think you're right. You're very fortunate to run into him, to be working with him and have him have that knowledge because, I know for me, I used to think, well, my son, I've told you is, he's almost 5 years sober, but I used to think, oh, poor Will, he's drowning his sorrows, his feelings in alcohol, and I wasn't aware that I was drowning my feelings by being busy. And so I think we all, maybe you don't end up going to jail for avoiding your feelings and not letting them pass through, let that negative energy pass through you. You take it and you, like one of my guests said, you shove your feelings down to the basement, they go down and lift weights. So that's great advice that he gave you, to like feel it and then to not take it out in a destructive manner. And we may not even take it out in a destructive manner. We may take it out and just like every night come home from work and binge watch Netflix, right?
Right.
Just not being present,
Right.
not feeling the feelings. I
It's-
did that a lot. And it's painful to process it, but it's more painful to hold it in.
It is. And I agree with you 100% on that, because I think that there's obviously, I'm not going to say there's just this and then there's this. There's not just a left and right when it comes to this kind of stuff. But I do think that there's a spectrum. And I think on the left side of the spectrum, there's people that have personality traits that are very avoidant. And then I think on the other end of the spectrum, there's people that have personality traits that say, I'm just going to run towards this. I don't care that it's a problem or that it's scary or that it's, I'm confronting this head on. I'm not going to run the other direction. And I think that obviously there's people in between that spectrum that you can have a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, I've never been the type of person to be avoidant about anything, about my emotions, about how I'm feeling, about things that I'm going through, about, it just doesn't matter. I'm not, whether something's hard or easy, I'm still going full force. You know what I mean? And that's really been my personality. And I think, that's kind of weighed in my favor a
Yeah.
lot,
Sounds like it
because,
has.
I have enough insight about myself to know, okay, like you're starting to feel a little bit sad. You're starting to feel a little bit depressed. Let's try to analyze this. What's going on? How are you feeling? Maybe we need to go get some therapy. Maybe we need to talk to somebody about this instead of just keeping it in. I'm the kind of person that I'm able to process myself, and I'm not going to shove it under the rug.
Good for
Never
you.
going to do that.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's why that's one of the reasons why you're still here. I mean, after everything that you've been through, because this was February 2020, your brother passed away. Now your mom's got 3 sons and you've got 2 brothers and you're the last one left. And you're living with your dad during the pandemic. Then what happened? And before we get into that, let me just say, post something here. Donjette says Joshua comes from a Hebrew name meaning God is deliverance. Joshua was the Israelite leader who succeeded Moses and led the Hebrews to the promised land. Joshua and Caleb. Joshua was a faithful aid to Moses. She's talking about your name.
Yeah.
Thanks, Donjette.
It's funny that she said that, because that's the exact reason that my dad named me that. My dad had the idea to name me Joshua because of the Bible. Yeah. So our family's Jewish, so that was a strong predictor for what they were going to name us.
And then we've got Likia here. She's tuning in from Costa Rica, and I don't know if you know Daniel or not, but he said you're an amazing man. And I don't know. Do you know this woman?
Yeah, I have to talk to her every day.
Oh, your mom. And then Sue says, so proud of my nephew for sharing his trauma and how he goes on day after day and not just going on, but succeeding in life for sure. So, anyway, so we've got the pandemic going on. Your brother just passed away during the pandemic, which was a complete shock to everybody. And then what happened with your father?
So, this is probably the hardest segment, is getting into this part, because to me, my father was everything: best friend, confidant, we had such a close relationship. I mean, it's the type of relationship that any son would want to have, with their dad. But Alex passes in February of 2020. The next month, obviously, President Trump comes on and says, "Oh, we're locking everything down." And so that's kind of scary. Me and my dad don't know how to deal with that. And it turns into this whole situation where, essentially, my grandmother had come for the funeral for Alex from Florida, my dad's mom, and she was staying with us. And she was planning on going right back to Florida, but then when the pandemic hit, she was kind of like, I don't think traveling right now is probably the best idea. And so she stayed with us. It was just me, her, and my dad. And in June, fast forward to June from March, she fell in the garage, had an accident. She had to go to the hospital. She ended up breaking part of her pelvic bone from the fall. She slipped in the garage, and she ended up going to the hospital. And then they sent her to one of these rehabilitation places to kind of do physical therapy. And she came home from that. And I remember talking to my dad, and I was very fearful because I said, you were hearing on the news at that time that these nursing homes and rehabilitation places were breeding grounds for COVID.
Yeah.
And so I was really nervous about her coming back to the house. And, I kind of told my dad, I said, maybe we should just have my uncle from Florida just come and pick her up directly, because I don't think it's a good idea. Because me and my dad have been isolating for months.
Yeah.
At the house. We're not leaving the house. We're not doing anything except to go to the grocery store, and that's just essentials. And when she came home, sure enough, within a couple of days, she got a fever. She started coughing. And then I was next up. I got sick. And then my dad got sick. And me and my dad were kind of right there in line with the timeline. We kind of got sick at the same time. And my dad ended up becoming very sick. I ended up becoming very sick. And it got to the point where, I had urged my dad, because I had did one of these telehealth appointments, get a prescription called in just to see, antibiotics, whatever. At that time, we didn't know what COVID was. We had no idea. Doctors didn't know.
Right.
So they gave me some steroids and some antibiotics, and I urged my dad, because my dad was a diabetic. And so I was super nervous, because they were saying people that have diabetes and pre-existing conditions, they can get very sick. And so I was very nervous. I said, Dad, you need to get on this telehealth. We had the same doctor at the time. And so because he's diabetic, though, they couldn't give him steroids.
Oh, wow.
They could only give him the antibiotic, which he took. And July 25th, I'll never forget, I woke up and went downstairs. I was so sick. I remember feeling so tired and weak that I couldn't even walk. Fever of 103 for 6 or 7 days at that point. And I remember going downstairs and I saw my grandmother. She had recovered because she got sick first. I don't know how she did, because she had diabetes and all the other stuff too. She's old. She's 88 years old. But I went down and I said, have you seen Dad? I knocked on his door and I went in his room, and I didn't see him at first. So I started looking around the house to see where he was. And she's like, no, he hasn't come down yet. And so I went back upstairs to look in the bedroom, and I looked down and I saw him on the floor. He was collapsed. And it's in that moment, I was so sick myself that I couldn't even process what was going on. I couldn't even really have an understanding about what I was seeing. At that point, I was like, am I dead? Me personally, I'm like, this has got to be a dream. This isn't real. And, I had to go next door to the next door neighbor. I called 911, and they kept telling, the 911 operators don't know everything, but they kept telling me you need to flip him over. You need to do this. And I was trying to explain, I don't have any energy. I feel like I'm about to pass out myself. And so they were like, can you go next door and get somebody to help? And so the next door neighbor was an RN at Emory. And she was friends with my dad, and I knew her very well. And she came over and she talked to the paramedics. They came, and my dad was dead. He had been dead for a couple hours. I didn't know about it because, I was asleep. They said that he died from COVID-19 and cardiac arrest. That's the cause of death, and so that's why he had collapsed on the ground. And then at that point, the paramedics come, they take me, and then they put me in the ambulance, and they say, "Yeah, you're you're really sick, and now that we see your dad has passed away, like we're gonna go ahead and take you because you might be next." And so I get to the hospital at Emory, just finding out that my dad is dead. My brother died 3 months ago, and now I'm in the hospital. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. I'm in good health. I get a physical every year. I get my blood checked. Like I'm staying on top of myself. Like I don't have any issues, health issues. And I'm extremely sick from COVID-19. And they do an x-ray and blood work on me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you have double pneumonia. You're going to need to be admitted." And so they admitted me into the ICU. And at that point, and in that exact moment, I didn't care whether I lived or died. And I know that that's something crazy to hear. I'm sure some people in the audience are like, "Oh, how could you feel like that?" But you got to understand the circumstances around that event. I just lost my brother. I just saw my dad die. And now I'm in the hospital. And they're telling me, I asked the doctor, I said, "Am I going to be okay?" And he's like, "We don't know."
Wow.
That was
And you're just feeling so exhausted. I mean, you had a temperature of 103 for 6 or 7 days.
6 or 7 days, and it didn't go down at all.
Yeah, so your mind's not thinking straight when at all. So,
Nothing.
I mean, I think it's understandable that so what made you hang on?
It's interesting because I've only told a few people this, but when I was sitting in that hospital bed at Emory, which by the way, I'm not sure if you were familiar with Emory here in Atlanta. It's one of the best hospitals in Atlanta. It's one of the best hospitals in the United States, but they saved my life. Not just physically, but emotionally as well.
Mm.
When I was in that bed in the ICU, I was hospitalized for 11 days. There was this, I think they call it a chaplain, like a person, like a kind of like a priest that's at the hospital.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not Catholic, I'm Jewish and I have a different religion. This guy called me on the phone, like in my room, and I was like, "Hey, hello, blah blah blah." He's like, "Hi, Joshua, how are you doing?" And I'm thinking like, "Okay, is this one of my doctors? Like, what is this?" And it turns out to be the chaplain. And the chaplain said, "I understand what's going on. I was made aware of, your dad just passed away and you're here. And, I wanted to pray with you." And, in that moment, I'm kind of like, "Okay, yeah, sure." And, he prays with me. And I remember specifically telling him, I said, I don't think I'm going to make this. I don't think I'm going to make this. I felt so like defeated. Like I was so ready to just go, like tired, exhausted, emotionally just numb. And I was just like, "Just take me,
Yeah.
take me." Like honestly, like not suicidal or anything like that, but just kind of like I was ready. If it happened, I'm ready to go. And I'll never forget the chaplain told me on the phone, he said, "It's not your time yet. It's not your time yet." And I said, "Well, how do you know?" He's like, "You have a lot of stuff you got to do. A lot of stuff you have left to do." And it was like almost like a surreal moment for me because I was like, it was one of these moments where it was like, this isn't just, the priest trying to like, have a little, heart to heart moment. Like this was something that like, it's almost like when he said it, he knew, like he had
Yeah.
just talked to God and God told him like, "Nah, he's going to be all right." And for me, that's when my life turned around in that moment. I said to myself, I said, if I can make it out of here, I'm going to start changing a lot of stuff because this is crazy. Like I came this close to dying and I was given another chance.
Did you ever get to talk to him again?
I wrote him a letter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's
wrote.
awesome.
I wanted to write, just some for me. Like something written is a lot more formal, something
Yeah.
that you hold on to.
Yeah.
Um, and he wrote me back, and we had a little conversation, a little dialogue, but um, yeah, I was very thankful for that.
Oh, I bet. How so you were in the hospital 11 days.
11 days.
And then how has your dad's mom taken all of this?
Rough,
I bet.
rough, because that's a whole nother dynamic. She's lost two children as well. It's kind of interesting because my uncle, my dad's brother, is a middle child, and my grandmother lost my aunt, which was her youngest, and also now just lost my dad, which was the oldest. And she's left with her middle, just like my mom is left with her middle.
Wow.
And so it's kind of weird. Like me and my uncle are kind of in the same situation. Like we only have our mom left, we don't have our dad, and we don't have either of our siblings. It's the same exact scenario. So my grandma, she didn't take it well. She's still not taking it well. I think she's starting to become on the verge of not Alzheimer's, but a little bit of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's doing okay for her age, but she's taking it very rough.
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
only imagine. Well, how has this past experience where you actually almost passed away, how has that changed the way you live your life now?
Changes it a lot. Um, when all this happened, I just thought I'm just a law student. I just want to be a lawyer. I just want to go out there and I want to work. I want to have a good living. I want to have a good life. This is before all this. And when this happened, it was just kind of like it really made me sit down and reassess a lot about what it is that I'm doing with my life and why I'm doing it. I think that's one of the most powerful things about your program here is why. What's your why? Why are you doing all this?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I came to the conclusion that I don't think that I was ever doing it for the wrong reasons, but now I have a more clear purpose as to what I'm doing with my life. And I think that these circumstances that I dealt with shaped the person that I am right now.
For sure.
Um, it's not even a question. I've done a lot of reading. Um, I'm a big movie guy. I love movies. I like to see stories of other people. And so combination of reading and watching films and just kind of taking care of myself, and continuing to focus on school because I still had 2 years of law school after all this happened.
Yeah.
And a lot of people come up to me, friends of mine that I'm colleagues with in law school, and they said, Josh, why are you still enrolled? Like, why are you still here? I have a really, really good friend of mine that I'm going to begin bar prep with here shortly, Albert Thompson, who's been a close friend of mine, become a really more like a brother through law school. He told me, he said, if I were in your shoes and this happened to me, I would have dropped out.
Why didn't you drop out?
I don't know. I don't know.
What you said that, you kind of you've realized you're still on the right path. It sounds like you really want to be an attorney.
Right.
What do you want to do as an attorney? What kind?
I'm gonna do criminal. I'm not really sure what I've been debating on whether or not to go and be a prosecutor first and then transition into criminal defense. But
Mm-hmm.
I know that eventually I want to be in criminal defense.
Mm-hmm.
But that much is clear. But as far as why didn't I drop out, there was just this perpetual motor that kept moving me, and I'm not really sure what it was. But I think it might have been a combination of just me not wanting to throw everything down the drain.
Yeah.
Really seeing, okay, you lost your brothers, you lost your dad, you lost uh, pretty much everything. You only got your mom left. You don't really have a family anymore. And, people say all the time, you got family, you got uncles and aunts, but that's an extension. It's not, you don't see or talk to them every day.
Yeah.
So when you just take all that away from you all at one time, it's very traumatic.
So how do you said that there's still a chance for you to live your life in a healthy, constructive, hopeful way. There's still a chance for you to create a life that you really love living.
Right.
How do you do that?
By being very patient and easy with yourself. For me specifically, surviving this trauma that I did, it took a lot of meditation, self-reflection, perseverance, passion, just a lot of looking at yourself in the mirror and saying, this is something that I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to finish this. I started it. Yeah, there's been a lot of roadblocks. There's been a lot of bumps in the road. There's been a lot of obstacles placed in my path. But once again, we go back to the same thing. Am I the type of person that's going to avoid, or am I the type of person that's going to run head on? You can place a 50,000-foot wall in front of me, and I don't care if I have to drill a hole through it. I'm getting through it. It's not something that's going to stop me. And so I think for some people that might be on the other end of the spectrum that kind of, get discouraged from having obstacles put in their path, I would tell those folks that there is still a life that is worth living. Like you said, like there is a life on the other side of that obstacle. You just have to figure out how to get around it, or get under it, or get past it, or get to the side of it. You have to, it's not just a, one size fits all. You have to figure that out for yourself. And I think every individual has to figure that out, because this kind of stuff is happening all over. You see record numbers in the world right now. The CDC just released, information about highest amount of drug overdoses ever recorded. Gun violence is at an all-time high. I mean, people are out there that are watching even this show might have just lost a family member, to something. And, it's not even just losing people, it's losing pieces of yourself. And I think that mental health and, like I said, self-reflection and really having a good insight about your own behavior and your own personality has a big effect on whether or not you're going to be able to make it onto the other side.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think that, and I did this, we tend to point like if once this changes, or if that was different, or if this was different. And one of my coaches said, when you point your finger at somebody, you have three pointing back at you. So it's that self-reflection, it's understanding yourself, and it's letting those feelings pass through you, because thoughts are energy. And when you shove those thoughts down and those feelings down, it gets stuck. So how do you let it flow through? How do you be so centered that the circumstances, everything happening around you doesn't really impact you? And that's could be harder for quote unquote big things than it is for little things. But you start with the little things. And you gave me a list of some books you've read: The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, The Confidence Gap: From Fear to Freedom by Russ Harris, What Happened to You by Bruce Perry, and How to Go on Living When Someone You Love Dies. And then movies: What Dreams May Come, Cinema Paradiso, and Blow. But The Power of Now, I've followed Eckhart Tolle for a while, and his videos on YouTube and stuff are really good. It's like the only moment is now. I know that stuff happened in the past, and it did happen, and this is the moment right here.
Yeah, and that book specifically, I read the whole thing, I think 3 times, because it's such a powerful book that there's so much. I wanted to go back and highlight and make notes of certain, excerpts from the book. But the biggest takeaway from that book, which I think is the most important thing, and it fits the narrative of your show perfectly, is the past has nothing for us except for memories and grief. The future holds nothing for us other than anxiety and needlessly worrying about what's coming up next. And I think that in order to really, this word is like, it's almost nobody believes that it's actually like possible. Happiness. The only place that happiness actually lives is in the now, right now, in this moment that we have. And when we're too focused on, oh, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do next week? How am I going to do this deadline? How am I going to, all that anxiety, that takes your focus away from enjoying the moment. And then
Yeah.
you're always worried about, oh, well, my dad died and my brother died, and I feel sad and I feel depressed, and all that doesn't bring anything to your now. You have to learn, and I think for most people, for me specifically, I had to learn how to let go of my past, and I had to learn how to stop worrying about the future. Everyone is going to have to worry a little bit, right?
Right.
Because we have to make goals and we got to motivate ourselves to look forward to something. But the now is really the only place that we can feel happiness. And I feel like if we're able to kind of have that happy medium of living right now in this moment, you can have a good life. Learn from what happened in the past and don't repeat it.
Right.
Look to the future and have goals, but don't worry about it.
Right.
Work towards it right now. Be happy with it. That's the biggest takeaway from that book.
And I would say too, I think a lot of people say this, the happiness comes from inside us. It doesn't come from, buying a new ring or buying a new car, or that's fleeting happiness, joy, whatever. The joy really comes from being at peace with yourself. And it's a matter of like understanding that our thoughts lead to our feelings. And we can change our thoughts. Our mind isn't us. We're the observer of our mind.
Right.
That's what Eckhart Tolle talks about. We're observing our mind. We can see, oh, there you go again. You're thinking of that. And one of my last guests said, what we tend to do is rubber stamp that what our mind is thinking is, oh, that's the truth. We just rubber stamp it when really it's not the truth.
Right.
But we don't stop enough to really understand ourselves. And that's what that a coach in an area called mental fitness, that's what that program is. It's like, how do you stop and switch your mind to the sage perspective, which is you can turn everything that's happened into a gift or an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And you may not see it right away. So can you say that you've found a gift or an opportunity in everything you've been through?
Yes, I have. And, honestly, this is going to sound silly, but you mentioned one of the movies that I had raised in the list that I gave you. There was a movie called Blow with Johnny
Wow.
Depp from 2001. It's about a guy that ends up becoming like a cocaine distributor, right? And his whole purpose is, hey, I need money. I've never had money when I was a kid, and I want to make a lot of money because I think it's going to make me happy. To me, honestly, like like I said, I'm a big movie guy. For me, that story, it echoes so real in my own life, because one of the things that I had to deal with when my dad died, and is how am I going to handle all this estate stuff now?
Mm-hmm.
I'm in law school now. I got to handle his estate, and I got to do all this other stuff. And I'm not going to get into numbers or anything like that, but one thing that I can say is that I learned at the age of 30 what most people don't learn until the age of 65. And that's where this movie comes in, is that we tend to look towards something like, oh, I want to get a high paying job. I want to make a lot of money. It's going to make me happy. Anybody that's told you that money makes you happy never had money.
Mm-hmm.
Never had money.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make you happy.
No.
You can have $60 million and you're not going to be happy.
Mm-mm.
Because it becomes more of like a now what? I got the mansion. Now what? I got the Corvette. Now what? I got the beautiful wife. Now what? I got this. Now what? We can't live our lives like that, chasing the next big thing, the next thing. You got to have the experience. That's how I was able to learn how to enjoy this moment, surviving the trauma and thriving forward. Enjoy the moment right now with your friends, with your family, with the people that you do have around you. I might not have my dad or my brothers, and I might, I might not have everything that everyone else has, but I'm fortunate enough to be alive right now. I graduate law school on Saturday, and I'm looking forward to the next process of my life. And for people out there that are watching that are struggling with something that they've got going on, I hope that I can kind of be a channel of some sort to try to say that, no matter what it is, it doesn't matter what it is, big or small, you can get past this and you can have a good life. You just got to reflect. You have to be at peace with yourself. So.
Yeah. 100%. Elizabeth, I will put, when we get off here, I'll put a list of the books in in the LinkedIn comments. That's where I'll put them, the books and the movies. And then I'll also have them in the show notes when this is published as a regular podcast. So I think, I can't remember, it was about a year ago, maybe right after your dad had passed away, that we were going to have an interview possibly, and then schedules got messed up and whatever, and we got it scheduled for now. What's different about you? What are you saying now that's different that you might not have really realized about a year ago?
A lot. I wouldn't have been able to give the type of insight a year ago that I would be able to give you today. Yeah. And I won't be able to give you the type of insight today that I could have given you next year. Right. And I think that's what this whole show is about, is every year that passes by, we learn new things about ourselves. And it's not just about us. It's about how we come off to other people around us. And so other people have been able to give me insight about myself that I never knew I had, because like you said, sometimes we're kind of looking on the outside of ourselves, at our own self, but other people might not see what we see. Other people might see something that you don't see. And so I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of people in my life over the past year that have been able to kind of provide me with some insight about myself that I didn't know about. And that provides me with opportunities to work on myself. And it also provides me opportunities to reflect on what's good already, not necessarily negative. So.
Yeah, I love that. Because, last year, so when I first started the show 3 years ago, next week is the 3-year celebration for this show, and the 199th episode that I'll record next week. But it was the Onward podcast, facing adversity and moving forward, because that's what I'd done all my life, right? With things that I've talked about before on the show, with raising my kids, with going through a divorce, with just pushing, going, making the best of it, moving forward, facing adversity, moving forward. I've done that. That's what my podcast will be about. Then after interviewing people, I changed it to facing adversity, moving forward, and discovering yourself along the way. And then I changed it to create a life you love living now, because I saw my children's father pass away at 64, and he didn't say much, but I could see, I've known him for a long time. I could see what he was thinking. He was reviewing how he had lived his life, and he wasn't happy with himself. And he was waiting to retire for something to happen, this to happen or that to happen. It's like, when I retire, when the kids grow up, when this happens, when that happens. No, now. What can you do now to create a life that you really love?
Right.
And so all of my guests have helped me too, to get to this point. And that's what I'm working on. And for me, a life I love living doesn't mean traveling and making a ton of money. And, it's like helping other people. I love doing this podcast. Clearly I do, because I fund it out of my own pocket. And so I love it. It doesn't even matter to me, because I just love it. So what can you do what can you find in your life that you really love? What are you waiting for? And you say to yourself, well, no, that couldn't happen. Well, how do you know? What's another way of looking at it? You might be looking at it just from this perspective when there's all these other perspectives, but our minds just keep us to this and say that couldn't happen. I would like that, but it can't happen. So yeah, I guess if you think it can't, it won't.
Right. And that's where it all begins. It's right there, what you just said. You got to have the mindset. And in order to have the mindset, you have to have enough insight about yourself to know what it is that I'm going to do to be able to turn this into a reality instead of just thinking upon it. So.
Yep. And it sounds like you've had, I don't know if you've worked with coaches, but it sounds like you've had mentors, a lot of people in your life and movies. You went out and sought, input to help you. You didn't do this just on your own.
No, I'm always seeking, because there's always other people that are going to know a lot more than me. And that's what I've done my whole life. And, like I said, I already gave him a shout out, but Lawrence Lewis has really been one of the only people that has kind of pushed me through this whole experience. Mm-hmm. And I've come out a better man because of it. So I just want to thank him. I don't know if he's watching, but I just wanted to say thank you. So.
Well, if he didn't watch, make sure he sees it. Okay, Joshua?
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being on this show tonight. And I think that with divine intervention, the timing of this show is just perfect. I think this is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? And it's you've you've come a long way. You had a lot more to share with us than you would have a year ago. You've got some perspective on everything that you've been through. And congratulations on graduating from law school Saturday, you said, right?
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
awesome. Thank you to everybody who watched tonight. I really appreciate you. I can see, 24 people. We might even have more than that. And I really appreciate you all watching. When you we log off when we're done, you can still put a comment in and Josh will see it. I'll see it. Share what you thought about this episode. Take a screenshot and share it and say what you learned. Share a link, share the video. So Donjette says, as we wrap this up, congratulations on your graduation. The best is yet to come. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just went to my son's graduation last weekend, and it's just so awesome. I know your mom will be so proud, and you are too. So thank you very much, Josh. I'm going to put you in the green room right now.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for watching tonight. I really appreciate you. Really appreciate you being here. It just is so nice to be, when you're talking live, see people engaging in the comments and see that support. And I greatly appreciate it. I hope you can join me next week, 7:30, where we're going to be having a celebration for the Onward podcast. 3 years of publishing this show. And I'm excited to bring the guy who wrote the song Quantum Leap that I play in the music. We're going to talk about what that song means and the words to that song and how I met him. Because 3 years ago when I picked that song and met him, I didn't really understand the words in it. And now I do. And it's just going to be awesome to talk with him. My son's going to be on the show. I think my daughter will be on the show. So we're just going to have Jenny Clark, a good friend of mine. We're just going to have some people coming in and out. And I'll probably, depending on how many people we have that want to come on, I'll share the link so you can join me for a quick second or something. And just, help me celebrate. My whole life, I didn't really celebrate my accomplishments. I just didn't take that time. And so this is a big deal for me to even have a celebration like this, because I just kind of blew past it, on to the next thing, not really enjoying the moment now. And that's what I want to do next week. Enjoy the moment now of 3 years. It's a big deal. Most people quit podcasting after 7 episodes because it's not easy. It takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of work. So thank you for joining me tonight, and for Josh and joining him as well. And I hope to see you next week right here again, live. All right. I'll talk to you later. Onward Live is sponsored by Emily Harmon Coaching and Consulting. Visit my website, emilyharmon.com, to learn more about me and my coaching programs. I'd love to help you create a life you love living. Remember, every adversity is our own personal university. Sometimes the lessons are difficult, and we must learn from our experiences. Vulnerability is your superpower. You are lovable and worthy. And we discuss these topics and more because professional is personal. Thank you for joining us and engaging.